All right, video number 3. Riddle me this, Batman. Okay, there's your IQ test for the day. Visual acuity kind of slows you down, 15-20 seconds. I want to quote from one of my favorite movies. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak. Why? Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power. Words offer the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth. And the truth is, there's something terribly wrong with this country, isn't there? How did this happen? Who's to blame? Well, there are those more responsible than others. But truth be told, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into a mirror. Now what we want to do is we need to look into the mirror of history, as I call it. Back when I was a kid, we're talking grade school here. We didn't have middle school when I was growing up. 6th grade, 7th, 8th grade, we taught history, right? You go to high school, you're learning history. History courses, Shakespeare, English lit class in college. At the time, you think it's useless and a waste of time. Well, it's very myopic thinking. It's the thinking of a young person, all right? We need to go to 1895. There's a case called Pollock versus Farmers. This is where it starts. What's wrong with this country? It starts with, well, among other things. But our story starts in 1895 with a case called Pollock versus Farmer. Pollock versus Farmer struck down a Taft-era tax, all right, as an unapportioned direct tax in 1895. Now, who's responsible for the condition of it? I claim that the worst presidency in its administration that has ever existed in our history is the Wilson administration. Let's jump forward to 1913. In response to Pollock versus Farmer, Congress in the several states thought it was a good idea to pass and ratify the 16th Amendment, which allowed taxation without apportionment. Right? Now, there's a lot of arguments about the 16th Amendment, and I can make other videos about that. But I like to think that that's the misdirection. The worst amendment in the Constitution is the 17th Amendment. We'll get to the case law behind that in just a minute. The 17th Amendment is the amendment that destroyed the Republic. Under Nation 1 we stand Republic under which we stand. Right now we live under a legislative democracy. It's mob rule. The proper term of it is an ochlocracy, ochlocracy, ochlocracy. It's mobocracy, majority rule in Congress. It's not the way it's supposed to be. The way it was originally set up is that out of the several states, the individual legislatures sent Senate representatives to the Senate to be able to represent states' rights. All right? The 17th Amendment got rid of that. And now, of course, we vote for the senators. They go up to Congress for 6, 12, 18, 24 years. They sit there forever until they die, or they really screw up and somebody comes along and replaces them. It's the 17th Amendment has allowed Congress, without having it properly under the original Constitution, senators representing states' rights being sent to Congress. Right? So that's number 2 that was wrong with 1913 in the Wilson administration. The number 3, and probably the most financially devastating act, came in 1913, and that's the Federal Reserve Act, where we created fiat currency and we started the process of moving off of gold and silver as a metal-backed currency. It took several years. It took many, many, many years for them to fundamentally implement the process. You couldn't just do it overnight, or the Supreme Court had to get on board, and we'll go into that for just a minute. So in 1913, look at the damage that was done. The 16th Amendment ratifying unapportioned tax, which violates the original Constitution. Right? They did that. The framers put that in for a reason. The 17th Amendment, which destroyed the Republic by allowing direct vote to the people for the Senate instead of letting the states send their own representatives. Because if the senators that the states sent in didn't vote the way that the states wanted them to vote, they could just remove them. They'd sit there for 6 years for good behavior, but the states could remove them, and we got rid of that. And that's what actually fundamentally destroyed the Republic. And then, of course, the Federal Reserve Act. So now there's a case. I have some notes here because these are some of these cases I don't actually know very well. One case. Okay, so now we have to move forward to. Let me back up a little bit. 1913. 1913. Because of the Federal Reserve Act, causes a problem. And of course, the Supreme Court got right on along board with this. Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution says that no state, I'm paraphrasing, of course, no state shall make anything but gold or silver coin in tender of payment of debt. Right? And then, of course, magically the Supreme Court says, no, that's okay. The Constitution doesn't say it. Now, let me go through this real slow. No state shall make anything but gold or silver coin in tender of payment of debt. But then the Federal Reserve Act allows Congress to be able to create fiat currency for the government, but yet the states don't have to pay their bills in gold or silver coin in payment of debt. Article 1, Section 10 also states, and this one's important in a timely manner. Remember one of the previous videos I had where I said that the governors of the states are the executive, and they're able to control the corporations through contract, because you're an entity of the entities of government, and because of that, the executive can tell anybody who's licensed under them, under government, what they can do, right? Well, the problem with this is no state, Article 1, Section 10, it also says that no state shall make any law, and that includes rules, regulations, statutes, ordinances, doesn't matter. It says no state shall make any law impairing the obligation of contracts. So that's why I said yes and no. Yes, as a corporation, they can create them, but the problem is that the policies promulgated down from his emergency orders interfered with the obligations of contract. They impaired the obligations of contract. All right, so now let's go to the case. It was called, those, by the way, were passed because FDR, Delano Roosevelt, threatened the Supreme Court because of the New Deal with court packing. Just exactly what Biden's trying to do. If he doesn't get his way, I'm going to add more justices to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court started writing opinions to be able to support things like Social Security. Gold isn't money anymore, so you can use paper money, and so on. Then West Coast Hotel versus Parrish was one of the original nails in the coffin that moves towards contract depriving us of our liberty. It was a case that came out of the state of Washington with respect to minimum wage for women and women only. Surprisingly, they didn't figure out that it was a violation of 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, but that's another argument. So what we have is West Coast Hotel versus Parrish. And long story short, it was one of the very first ones that allowed an expansion of the Interstate Commerce Clause to be able to support the use of this minimum wage. Well, in 1942, here comes the biggie. I have to spell this one out. It's Wickard, W-I-C-K-A-R-D versus Filburn. Now, let me give you some background on this. What happened was Wickard versus Filburn was a man growing wheat in his this is wartime powers, and they were regulating how much, through the Secretary of Agriculture, how much farmers could grow and what they could do with it. Which on the surface seems okay, but it was ridiculous. So anyway, the man grows a bunch of wheat. He grows more wheat than he should have grown, and then he uses it to feed his cows, right? He gets in trouble over this and ends up going to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that even though he was using the wheat to feed his own cows, because he had more wheat than he was allowed to grow, he was affecting interstate commerce. Even though it wasn't meant for sale and he wasn't moving in interstate commerce, he was affecting interstate commerce by not engaging in interstate commerce. He had wheat that he used to feed his grain and do other stuff with, but then that means his supply was greater than his demand, and he should have not had that wheat, and he would have been able to go out into the free market and buy that wheat, and they're using it for price stabilization. Wickard has been, since then, had been used for everything under the sun up until the 1990s. For the expansion of Congress to be able to use the interstate I call it the bastardization of the Interstate Commerce Clause, to be able to stick their sticky little fingers into absolutely everything that we do. I'll give you an example. When I moved to Colorado in 1984, we used to have 3 2 bars where 19-year-old kids could go into a bar and they could get 3.2 beer. Alcohol. So it was the bar scene for 19, 20-year-olds to be able to go into, and then magically all of a sudden they disappeared. You ask yourself, how is that? Well, there was a statute that was passed. It's called the Federal Uniform Drinking Age Act. It was passed in 1984. It took a while to implement. And what happens is that if the states don't mandate a minimum drinking age of the age of 21, they risk losing 10% of federal highway funds. And so the states shut down the 3-2 bars because they want those federal monies. And that's how the government sits down and it says they can't directly tell the states what to do. They say, hey, they dangle the money out there and say, hey, if you comply with what we want you to do, right, you enter into this contract with us. This is if you agree not to sell alcohol to people under the age of 21, we're going to give you additional funds for it. And that's how the federal government coerces the states to be able to comply to federal mandates. In fact, there's even a phrase that's called an unfunded federal mandate, and they don't do those. So anyway, so there we go. You want to look into Wickard versus Filburn, and you need to understand that our republic has been destroyed because of the Wilson administration, the lack of gold and silver and gold. I mean, stop and think about it this way. When I was a kid, we had silver dollars. We had actual quarters that were made of silver. I'm sure the people my age would remember this. Younger kids may not even know that coinage was actually made out of silver. In today's modern context, a dollar in let's say 1962, 1963, because we started to shy away from silver currency in 1963, 1964. Is worth about $25 well, anywhere from, because the silver market floats, between $20 and $25 a day. So if you had a dollar in 1960, it would only be worth in purchasing power 1/20th to 1/25th of what it was back in the early 1960s. I mean, when minimum wage was $1.10 an hour, it doesn't sound like much, but you could buy a lot more. I mean, gasoline was 25 cents a gallon, right? Today, minimum wage, depending on where you are, is anywhere from $11 to $15 an hour. I'm sure out in California, maybe even more than that. But when you've got it's almost $5 gas, $6, $7, $8 gas like it is out in California, this is absolute nonsense. The Biden's administration's policies are absolutely insane. It's all this green, electric cars. As a note, electric cars are never going to work. It's ridiculous. There's not enough cobalt on the planet with current technology. They have looked at sulfur as a choice, but it doesn't have any memory, so you can't use it. If you were to gobble up all of the cobalt on the entire planet, because it's all about energy density, to make electric cars with, Teslas with, Priuses and so on, you wouldn't be able to have all the cars that are just in the state of California, let alone the rest of the planet. The only thing that's going to work is it's called lifter technology, liquid fluoride thorium reactor technology, to create the electricity, to create the hydrogen used in hydrogen fuel cells. Now, if they move towards hydrogen fuel cells, then they could retrofit existing vehicles. You would be able to pull up to a pump, you'd be able to fill up, you'd be able to drive until you run out of, in essence, fuel again, you run out of gas again, and then so the infrastructure would have to be modified. But the idea of these electric cars, and then of course this green business, which is what electric cars and renewable energy are all about, the idea of getting rid of coal and gas and shutting down the XL pipeline and attacking the energy industry is exactly why this country is in the shitter the way it is today. Biden and these libtards and the Greens, people like Crazy Ocasio, Crazy Cortex, and the whole squad up there, low IQ, frankly, third world trash, have no real capacity, ability, or intellect, and that just tells you how stupid the people are that elect them into office. The people in Queens must be pretty goddamn stupid to be electing Ocasio, Crazy Cortex, into office. If she were to take an IQ test, I guarantee you she wouldn't be above 105. She's low IQ, once again, not educated, and no real capacity, ability, or intellect. She's got a big mouth, and she's I guess relatively attractive. So she does well on television. She makes for good screen time, I guess they could call it. But she's not that bright. And most of these people don't understand history, and they certainly don't understand economics, quantitative finance, and they simply don't know what it is that they're doing. And it's obvious because of where the direction the country is going. So there we go, Wickard versus Filburn. We lost our republic through the 17th Amendment, and there's an enormous number of these things that need to be fixed. If we can get somebody into the White House and we start voting these rhinos out, and we go back to constitutional originalism, we can still, certainly keep the 14th Amendment, and we want equal protection and equal rights for all under law and so on. But a lot of these amendments, like 16th Amendment needs to go away, and 17th Amendment for sure needs to go away. And then we need to have an honest Supreme Court look back and much like they did with Dobbs, and they sat back and said it's not a proper place for government to be sticking its nose into these. Look at the 10th Amendment; those powers now reserved to the states through the Constitution, or reserved to the people. And that's it. I mean, that's the way it is. Like the abortion issue right now, since it's not being eliminated, it's just being pushed back down to the states where it should have always been. And that moves to show how incompetent our Supreme Court justices can be. Is that I think it was Rehnquist Court back in 1972? They supported, they passed, a national organization for women and all this kind of nonsense. They got Roe v. Wade on the books for the last 49 years. And it's not the proper place for it at the federal level. The proper place for it is back into the states. So this Supreme Court, especially with the conservative justices that have been appointed by former President Trump, understand what the Constitution is about, and they're moving to cure these defects that we've been having to live with for the last 49 years. And hopefully they'll keep it up, gun rights and so on. So there we go. Thank you.